Welcome back to Chapter 4, in which Jared and Mallory find many things, but not what they're looking for. And the caption on this picture says, "The air was different." Once again, this is the Spiderwick Chronicles, Book 2, The Seeing Stone, by Tony Tetralisi and Holly Black. So they're off to find Simon. They have their rapiers, and they have Jared has the seeing stone on his monocle so that he can see those creatures. Stepping into the woods, Jared felt a slight chill. The air was different, full of the smell of green things and fresh dirt, but the light was murky. He and Mallory stepped through tangles of jewelweed and past thin trees heaped with vines. Somewhere above them, a bird started calling, making a harsh sound like an alarm. Beneath their footsteps, the ground was slick with moss. Twigs snapped as they passed, and Jared heard the distant sound of water. There was a streak of brown, and a small owl settled on a low branch, its head cocked toward them as it bit into a small, limp mouse in its claw. Mallory pushed through a knot of bushes, and Jared followed. Tiny burrs caught on his clothes and in his hair. They sidled around the crumbling trunk of a fallen tree swarming with black ants. There was something different about his vision with the stone in place. Everything was brighter and more clear, but there was something else too. Things moved in the grass and the trees, things he couldn't quite see but was aware of for the first time. Faces made of bark and rock and moss that he only saw for an instant. It was though the whole of the forest was alive. There, Mallory fingered a broken branch and pointed to where clumps of ferns had been trampled. That's the way they went. They followed the trail of smashed weeds and snapped branches until they came to a stream. By then the woods had grown more shadowed and the twilight sounds had increased. The cloud of gnats settled on them for a moment, then blew out toward the water. "What do we do now?" Mallory asked. "Can you see anything?" Jared squinted through the eyepiece and shook his head. "Let's just follow the stream. The trail has to pick up again." They walked on through the forest. "Mallory," Jared whispered, pointing to a huge oak tree. Tiny green and brown creatures were perched on a branch. Their wings resembled leaves, but their faces seemed almost human. Instead of hair, grass and flower buds grew from their tiny heads. "What are you looking at?" Mallory raised the rapier and took 2 steps backwards. Jared shook his head slightly. "Sprites, I think." "Why do you have that stupid expression on your face?" "They're just—" He couldn't quite explain. He extended his hand, palm up, and stared in amazement as one of the creatures alighted on his finger. Soft feet tickled his skin as the tiny fairy blinked up at him with black eyes. "Jared," Mallory said impatiently. At the sound of her voice, the sprite jumped into the air. Jared watched as it spiraled upward into the leaves above. The patches of sunlight filtered through the trees became tinged with orange. Up ahead, the stream widened where it ran under the remains of a stone bridge. Jared could feel his skin prickle as they got closer to the rubble, but there was no sign of goblins. The stream was very wide, almost. And so right here is a sprite. One alighted on his finger. Look how small they are. And he's looking through the monocle. That's why he can see it through the seeing stone. That's the name of this book. And this is a colored piece of newspaper that says, "Clippings from a Pennsylvania newspaper reporting the disappearance of Arthur Spiderwick's older brother Theodore in 1885, found among Arthur Spiderwick's papers." So, just a minute. Got to pick up my sentence. The stream was very wide, almost 20 feet across, and there was a darkness in the middle that seemed to speak of deep water. Jared heard a distant sound like metal grating against metal. Mallory stopped, looked across the water, and raised her head. Did you hear that? Could it be Simon? Jared asked. He hoped it wasn't. It didn't sound human at all. I don't know, Mallory said, but whatever it was, it's got something to do with these goblins. Come on. With that, Mallory bounded in the direction of the noise. Don't go in there, Mallory, Jared said. It's too deep. Don't be a baby, she said, and waded into the stream. She made 2 long strides and then dropped as though she had stepped off the edge of a cliff. Dark green water closed over her head. You warned her, huh? Oh my gosh, that is not what I expected. Something began to surface. Jared lunged forward. Dropping his rapier onto the bank, he plunged his hand into the icy cold water. His sister bobbed to the surface, sputtering. She grabbed for his arm. He had pulled her halfway onto the bank when something began to surface behind her. At first, it seemed like a hill rising from the water, stony and covered in moss. Then a head emerged, the deep green of rotten river grass, with small black eyes and a nose that was gnarled like a branch and a mouth full of cracked teeth. A hand reached for them. Its fingers were as long as roots, and its nails were black with the murk. Jared breathed in the stench of the bottom of the pool, putrid leaves, and old mud. He screamed. His mind went completely blank. He couldn't move. Mallory pulled herself the rest of the way onto the bank and looked over her shoulder. Bet she wished she wouldn't have done that. It was a troll. Of course there was a bridge, like the 3 billy goats gruff. What is it? What do you see? At her voice, Jared snapped into moving and stumbling woodenly away from the stream, tugging her along with him. Troll! He gasped. The creature lunged after them, long fingers dragging through the grass just short of where they were. Then the creature howled, and Jared looked back, but he couldn't see what had happened. It felt toward them again, but jerked away when one long finger fell into a beam of light. The monster bellowed. The sun, Jared said. It got burnt by the sun. There's not much sun left, Mallory replied. Let's go. Wait, the monster whispered. Its voice was soft. Yellow eyes regarded them steadily. Come back. I have something for you. The troll extended a closed hand as though something might indeed be clutched in its palm. Jared, come on. Mallory's voice was almost pleading. I can't see what you're talking to. Have you seen my brother? Jared asked. Perhaps I heard something a time ago, but it was bright, too bright to look. That was him. Must have been. Where did they go? The head swung toward the remnants of the bridge and then looked back at Jared. Come closer and I will tell you. Jared took a step away. No way. At least come get your sword. The troll gestured to the rapier beside itself. The sword was lying on the bank where Jared had dropped it. He looked over at his sister. Her hands were empty too. She must have left her sword at the bottom of the pool. Mallory took a half step forward. That's the only weapon we have. Come and take it. I will close my eyes if it will make you feel safer. One huge hand covered its eyes. Mallory looked at the sword in the mud. Her eyes focused on it in a way that made Jared very nervous. She was thinking about trying for it. You can't even see the thing, Jared hissed. Let's go. But the sword. Jared untied the eyepiece and held it out to her. Her face went pale at the sight of the massive creature peeking through a gap in its fingers, imprisoned only by the fading patches of sunlight. Come on, she said shakily. No, called the troll. Come back. I'll even turn around. I'll count to 10. It'll be a fair chance. Come back. Oh, I wouldn't trust it. Jared and Mallory ran on through the woods until they found a patch of sunlight to step in. Both leaned against the thick trunk of an old oak and tried to catch their breath. Mallory was shivering. Jared didn't know if it was because she was soaked or because of the troll. He unzipped his sweatshirt, took it off, and handed it to her. "We're lost," Mallory said between gulps of air, "and we're unarmed." "Least we know they couldn't have crossed the streams," said Jared, struggling to tie the eyepiece back on his head. "The troll would have gotten them for sure. But the sound was on the other side." Mallory kicked a tree, chipping off bark. Jared's nose caught the scent of something burning. It was faint, but he thought it smelled like scorched hair. "Do you smell that?" Jared asked. "That way," Mallory said. They crashed through the brush, heedless of the scratches, twigs, and thorns made along their arms. Jared's thoughts were all of his brother and fire. "Look at this!" Mallory stopped abruptly. She reached into the grass, picked up a single brown shoe. "It's Simon's!" "I know," Mallory said. She turned it over, but Mallory couldn't see any clues except that it was muddy. "You don't think he's—" Jared couldn't bring himself to say it. "No, I don't." Mallory shoved the shoe in the front pocket of her sweatshirt. He nodded slowly, allowing himself to be convinced. A little farther, and the trees began to thin. They stepped out onto a highway. Black asphalt stretched off into the distant horizon. Beyond it all, the sun was setting in a blaze of purple and orange, and on the shoulder of the road, in the distance, a group of goblins huddled around a fire. And then this picture, it shows the forest with the fungus on the trees, a single brown shoe.